I was moments away from boarding a plane to our honeymoon when armed agents swarmed the tarmac, claiming my husband was at the center of an organized scheme involving illegal weapons. My fairy tale wedding ended in a federal interrogation room, and the man I thought I knew turned out to be the architect of a nightmare that has put both our lives in the crosshairs. The champagne was still chilling in the suite, and the silk sheets were turned down, waiting for a couple who had finally tied the knot after 5 years of chaotic, beautiful, and sometimes exhausting courtship. Mark and I had spent the last 12 months meticulously planning every detail of this day. From the color of the napkins to the specific playlist that would carry us through the night, everything was perfect. We were supposed to be on a flight to the Maldives by sunrise. I had my passport tucked in my carry-on, my favorite sundress ironed, and a heart so full it felt like it might burst. The wedding reception was ending, the lights were coming up, and we were saying our final goodbyes to the last stragglers near the valet stand. I was mid-laugh, telling my maid of honor that I'd see her when we got back, when the rhythm of the night shattered. 2 black sedans screeched into the hotel driveway, blocking our path to the shuttle. I thought at first it was some elaborate prank orchestrated by Mark's brother, but the look on Mark's face erased that thought instantly. He went pale, his grip on my hand tightening until it was almost painful. Before I could even ask what was happening, 6 men in tactical vests emerged from the vehicles. They didn't move like pranksters. They moved like a precision machine. "Mark Evans!" the lead officer barked, his voice cutting through the soft ambient music still playing from the hotel's speakers. Mark didn't answer. He just stood there, anchored to the pavement, his eyes darting toward the exits. "I suggest you don't run, mister." "Evans," the officer continued, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. "We have a warrant. You are being detained under a serious accusation involving the transport of illegal weapons and a massive organized scheme that has been under the radar of the Service of Internal Security for the past 3 years." I felt the world tilt. My mind was racing, trying to reconcile the man I had married 3 hours ago, a man who worked in logistics, who loved hiking and insisted on reading aloud to me before bed, with the person they were describing. An organized scheme? Illegal weapons? My dress, which felt like a princess gown moments ago, now felt like a heavy, suffocating weight. I looked at Mark, pleading for him to laugh, to tell me this was a mistake, to tell me he was just an accountant who had ticked off the wrong person. But Mark didn't laugh. He looked at me, and for the first time in our relationship, his eyes weren't warm. They were cold, calculated, and terrifyingly distant. "Go inside, Sarah," he whispered, his voice steady in a way that terrified me more than the shouting officers. "Take your phone, go to the hotel suite, and stay there. Do not talk to anyone." "What is going on?" I screamed, my voice cracking as a bystander captured the scene on their phone nearby. "Mark, tell them they have the wrong person." "They don't have the wrong person," one of the agents said, stepping forward and shoving Mark against the hood of the car. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the loudest noise I had ever heard. It sounded like a gavel coming down on our entire life. "And for you, ma'am, you might want to consider how much you knew about the packages with substances he was moving through your joint accounts. Because right now, you're looking at an investigation that could land both of you away for an enormous amount of time." I stood frozen as they began searching him. From the hidden compartment in his leather jacket, they pulled out an encrypted satellite phone and a stack of untraceable currency. Then, they turned their attention toward me. One of the agents approached, pulling a folder from his jacket and holding it up so I could see a photograph. It was a picture of me, taken from across the street outside our apartment 3 weeks ago. In the photo, I was carrying a grocery bag. But in the background, clearly visible, was a man I had never seen before, whispering into a radio. "Your honeymoon isn't in the Maldives, Mrs. Evans," the agent said, his face inches from mine. "It's in an interrogation room, and trust me, your husband has been keeping secrets that are going to ruin you both." As they began dragging Mark toward the lead car, he turned his head back one last time. He didn't look remorseful. He looked at me with a desperate, frantic intensity and mouthed 2 words before the car door slammed shut. "Check the safe." Before I could even process what he meant, the hotel lobby door swung open, and the hotel manager came rushing out, followed by a man in a sharp suit who didn't look like he belonged at a wedding. He pointed directly at me, and the agents who were supposed to be taking Mark away stopped dead in their tracks. One of them looked at the man in the suit, then back at me, and pulled out a pair of zip ties. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just here for Mark. They were here for me, too. The zip ties bit into my wrists, cold and biting, a sharp reminder that my reality had fractured into something unrecognizable. I wasn't just a bride anymore. I was a person of interest in a federal investigation. The manager of the hotel, a man I had exchanged pleasantries with just that morning about the floral arrangements, wouldn't even meet my eyes. He stood by the entrance, his hands trembling as he held the door open for the agents who were now surrounding me like a protective, albeit hostile, wall. "I don't know what you're talking about," I shouted, my heels stumbling on the uneven cobblestone of the valet circle. "I'm a school teacher. I haven't done anything wrong." One of the agents, a woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to see right through my flimsy protestations, tightened her grip on my arm. "Mrs. Evans, the degree of your involvement is exactly what we're going to determine. But right now, you are being held for questioning regarding your knowledge of your husband's connections to an international organized scheme. Every bank statement, every flight, every work trip Mark took. We have it all, and it's all tied to you." They didn't put me in the car with Mark. They pushed me into a nondescript black SUV, the interior smelling of stale coffee and leather. As we pulled away, I watched the hotel lights blur into streaks of gold against the dark sky. The wedding guests were still out there, probably wondering why the bride had vanished into the night in the back of a tactical vehicle. The irony was so bitter it made my throat ache. I had spent months agonizing over the perfect menu, the perfect dress, the perfect exit, and here I was, being whisked away to a place I only knew from crime thrillers. My phone, which I'd tucked into my clutch, vibrated incessantly in my lap. I knew it was my mother, my sister, probably Mark's brother, but the agent next to me swiped it from my hand and tossed it into a Faraday bag. "Don't worry," she said, her voice devoid of empathy. "You won't be needing that where you're going." We drove for nearly 2 hours. The city lights faded into the desolate stretches of the highway, and the silence in the car was heavy, punctuated only by the crackle of the radio. My mind was in a tailspin. "Check the safe." Mark's words kept looping in my head. What safe? We lived in a rental apartment with a landlord who was notoriously stingy about repairs. We didn't have a wall safe or a floor safe or anything of the sort. Or at least, I didn't think we did. As the car turned onto a gravel road leading to a secure facility that looked more like an industrial warehouse than a police station, I realized I had been living in a curated reality. Every time I thought I saw a crack in Mark's behavior, a late-night phone call, a mysterious surge in his bank account that he'd shrugged off as a bonus, I had ignored it, chalking it up to my own insecurity or his stress at work. I had been a pawn in a game I didn't even know existed. We were led through a side entrance, past a series of heavy steel doors that locked with a rhythmic thud clack that signaled the end of my old life. I was placed in a room that was stark, windowless, and illuminated by a flickering fluorescent light. There was a metal table, 2 chairs, and a mirror that I knew, with sickening certainty, was a one-way glass. I sat there for what felt like hours, shivering in my wedding dress. My makeup was surely smeared, my hair falling out of its elaborate updo. I was a disaster. Finally, the door opened. A man in a charcoal suit walked in, carrying a thick file. He didn't introduce himself. He just sat down across from me and opened the folder, revealing photographs I had never seen before. They weren't of me. They were of Mark, meeting with people in shadowy parking garages, handing over large briefcases, and standing in front of high-end vehicles that he definitely didn't own. "Your husband is a key player, Sarah," the man said, his voice quiet, almost conversational. "And he's been using your clean reputation to mask his activities. You've been laundering money for an organized scheme without even realizing it. Or so you claim." "I told you I had no idea," I sobbed. "He told me he worked in logistics." The man leaned back, a dark smile playing on his lips. "Logistics. That's one way to put it. He moved restricted assets across borders, and he was very good at it. But here is the problem. He wasn't working alone. Someone was signing off on his credentials. Someone with a high-level security clearance that matches your own from your time working at the Ministry of Defense before you quit." My heart stopped. I hadn't worked at the ministry in 3 years, and I had left on good terms. Or so I thought. "I don't know what you're implying," I whispered. "I'm not implying, Sarah," the man said, pulling a single folded piece of paper from the file. He slid it across the table. It was a copy of a flight manifest from 6 months ago. It was a private charter flight, and my name was listed as a passenger alongside Mark's. I had never been on that flight. I had been in the hospital with the flu that week. "You were there," he said coldly, "and we have video evidence of you walking onto that plane. The question isn't whether or not you're guilty. The question is, which of our agents are you currently working for? Because if you're a double agent, we need to know right now before you're charged with attempt to break the law on a massive scale." I stared at the manifest, my hands trembling uncontrollably. I realized then that the woman in the video wasn't me. It was a woman who looked exactly like me. My height, my hair, my build, a decoy. I was about to open my mouth to explain, to tell him that I had been framed when the lights in the room suddenly died, plunging us into absolute suffocating darkness. Through the wall, I heard a muffled explosion, followed by the frantic sound of gunfire. Not the kind I'd seen in movies, but the sharp professional reports of suppressed weapons. The man across from me lunged for the door, but he was thrown back by the force of it being kicked open. In the doorway stood a silhouette holding a device that glowed with a faint blue light. He didn't look like the police. He looked like something far, far worse. He looked at me, tilted his head, and said, "We need to leave, Sarah. If you stay, you're dead by sunrise." The silence that followed the explosion was worse than the sound itself. The agent who had been questioning me was slumped against the wall, unconscious, his radio crackling with static that sounded like a dying breath. I stared at the man in the doorway. He was dressed in tactical gear that absorbed the meager light of the emergency exit signs, and his face was obscured by a high-tech visor. My wedding gown, once a symbol of a new beginning, now felt like a target painted on my back. "Who are you?" I choked out, my voice barely a whisper. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. "Is this Mark's doing? Did he send you?" The man didn't answer. He stepped into the room, his boots making no sound on the concrete floor. He moved with a terrifying, predatory grace. He bypassed me, moving straight to the agent on the floor, checking his pulse with cold, professional efficiency before grabbing the file that had been sitting on the table. "Mark isn't the one running this," the stranger replied, his voice modulated and metallic. "Mark is just a loose end. You, however, are an asset they can't afford to lose, or let go." He pulled a small silver device from his belt and tapped it against the wall. A low hum began to vibrate through the floorboards, making my teeth ache. "We have less than 2 minutes before the Service of Internal Security initiates a full lockdown of this sector. If you want to know why your life has been sold out to the highest bidder, you follow me, now." I stood up, my knees shaking so violently I nearly fell. Every instinct I had as a teacher, as a woman who followed the rules, screamed at me to stay, to wait for the authorities to return. But then I looked at the file he had grabbed, the photo of the woman who looked exactly like me, the decoy who had been traveling across borders on my credentials. If I stayed, I was just a pawn in an organized scheme I hadn't even known existed, a scapegoat destined to rot behind bars for crimes I didn't commit. "Why me?" I asked, following him into the dark, smoke-filled hallway. "I'm just a teacher. I don't have secrets." "That's exactly why you're the perfect cover," he retorted, his voice tight. "You're invisible, Sarah, or you were, until your husband got greedy." We ran through the labyrinthine corridors of the facility. The lights flickered, casting jagged shadows that seemed to chase us. We turned a corner and came face to face with 2 security officers in heavy gear. They raised their weapons, but the stranger was faster. He pulled an object from his jacket, not a traditional firearm, but a sleek, humming pulse emitter. With a flash of white light, the officers were knocked backwards, slumped against the lockers in a heap. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I vaulted over the legs of one of the fallen guards, my lace train catching on a metal corner and tearing with a sickening rip. I didn't look back. We reached a heavy service elevator at the end of the hall. He keyed in a sequence, and the doors slid open to reveal a freight lift that smelled of industrial oil. "Once we're out of this building, you're on your own," the stranger said, not looking at me. "I've hacked the cameras, but the system will reboot in 60 seconds. You need to head to the subway station on 4th and Main. Look for a man in a gray coat holding a red umbrella. He has your exit strategy." "Wait!" I grabbed his arm, forcing him to stop. His gear felt like cold steel under my fingers. "You said Mark was a loose end. Is he still alive? Did they take him somewhere else?" The stranger paused. He turned to me, his visor shifting to reveal a pair of eyes that were weary, almost sad. "He's at the secondary site, the one they use for the high-level interrogation of those involved in the transport of restricted items. But if you go looking for him, you'll be walking into the lion's den. They're waiting for you to try a rescue mission. It's a trap, Sarah. The whole thing is a trap designed to draw out whoever else in the organized scheme is left." The elevator shuddered and began to rise. Above us, the sounds of alarms finally began to wail, a shrill, piercing sound that set my nerves on fire. "How do I know you're not the one setting the trap?" I asked, my voice rising in panic. He pulled a small, folded piece of paper from his pocket and pressed it into my hand. "Because this is the key to the safe Mark told you to check. If you don't trust me, you don't have to. But the second you leave this elevator, the people who want you dead will be watching. You have 10 seconds to decide." The elevator chimed, indicating we had reached the ground level. The doors began to slide open, revealing the bright, harsh lights of a parking garage. I could hear the distant roar of sirens and the heavy thud of tactical boots hitting the pavement outside. The stranger grabbed my shoulder, pushing me toward the exit. "Run, Sarah! If you stay, you're looking at an enormous sentence for crimes you never committed." I bolted into the garage, the cold air hitting my face like a slap. I didn't look back to see if he was following. I just ran toward the exit ramp, my lungs burning, my wedding dress a tattered mess of silk and blood. I reached the street level, the city rain slicking the pavement, and saw it. A man standing under a street lamp holding a red umbrella, just as he had promised. But as I took a step toward him, a sleek black sedan pulled up onto the sidewalk, blocking my path. The window rolled down, and a face looked out. A face I hadn't seen in years, a face that was supposed to have been dead since the day I graduated from college. It was my father, and he was holding a weapon pointed directly at my heart. The rain began to fall in heavy, icy sheets, turning the city street into a blurred nightmare of neon reflections and slick pavement. I stood paralyzed, the breath caught in my throat like a shard of glass. My father, a man whose obituary I had read, whose funeral I had attended in a rainstorm identical to this one, and whose grave I had visited every year on the anniversary of his accident, was sitting in the driver's seat staring at me with a calm, predatory indifference that made my blood run cold. He didn't look a day older than the afternoon he disappeared. "Get in, Sarah," he commanded, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that triggered a flood of buried memories. Memories of late-night hushed conversations, the smell of burnt toast in our kitchen, and the way he used to check the locks on our front door 3 times every night. We don't have much time. Your husband's little side business has brought the entire house of cards down on our heads, and if you stay out here in the open, the Service of Internal Security will erase you before the sun hits the horizon. My legs felt like lead. Every rational part of my brain told me to turn and run, to find the man with the red umbrella, to scream for help. But the sheer shock of seeing him, the father who had supposedly been killed by an organized scheme years ago because he witnessed something he shouldn't have, held me captive. "You're dead," I whispered, the words trembling. "We buried you. I cried for months. Mark told me you were gone because—" "Mark told you a lot of things," my father interrupted, shifting the weapon to his left hand while keeping his eyes locked on me. "Mark was my protege. He was supposed to keep you safe, not drag you into the line of fire. He got arrogant. He thought he could move those packages with substances and illegal weapons without leaving a trail. Now the entire network is collapsing, and everyone associated with the Evans name is being hunted." A siren wailed nearby, cutting through the heavy air. The man with the red umbrella had vanished, replaced by a dark void where he had stood only seconds ago. The street was suddenly quiet, save for the rhythmic patter of rain against the car roof. "Why are you here?" I asked, taking a tentative step forward. My wedding dress clung to my skin, heavy with water and grime. "Are you part of this now? Are you the one who set the trap?" "I'm the only reason you're still breathing," he retorted, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. "Get in the car. If we leave now, I can explain the contents of that safe Mark mentioned. If you don't, you'll be in a cell for decades, serving a sentence for a life you never even lived. You have 5 seconds before those patrol cars round the corner." I looked at the street, then at my father. The desperation in his gaze looked genuine, yet I knew that my entire life had been a lie. If he was alive, then my mother had lied. If my mother had lied, then everything I had ever known about my upbringing, the reason we moved so often, the reason we never stayed in one house for more than 2 years, was just a way to cover their tracks. I was never a normal girl. I was a daughter of the network. I opened the passenger door and slid into the cold leather seat. The interior of the car smelled of ozone and expensive cologne. As I buckled my seatbelt, he accelerated, the tires screeching against the wet asphalt. He didn't look at me. He just watched the road, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "To the only place they won't look," he replied. "The safe Mark told you to check. It isn't a physical box, Sarah. It's a digital vault, and it contains the names of every person currently sitting in the Service of Internal Security who is on the payroll of the organized scheme you've been accused of serving. It's the leverage that will either save us or kill us." He reached into the glove box and pulled out a small, encrypted tablet. He tossed it into my lap. "Open it. Use the code from the paper that stranger gave you. You need to see what Mark was really doing with those packages with substances." I fumbled with the paper, my hands shaking so hard the ink blurred. I typed the code into the device and the screen flashed to life. It wasn't a list of names. It was a live video feed. My heart stopped. The feed showed the hotel suite where Mark and I were supposed to spend our wedding night. The room had been tossed, furniture shattered, and there, sitting in the middle of our bed, was a woman who looked exactly like me, the decoy. She was talking to someone on a radio, her voice clear and cold. "Sir, the target is in the car with the asset," she said into the device. "Proceed with the interception. We have the father." I looked at my father in terror, but he wasn't looking at the road anymore. He was looking at me, and he was smiling. He pulled a small silver remote from his jacket and pressed a button. Suddenly, the car doors locked with a heavy, metallic click, and a faint hissing sound filled the cabin. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he whispered, his eyes hardening into ice. "But you were always the best bait in the entire network." As the white gas began to fill the car, I reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. My vision began to blur, the world spinning into a kaleidoscope of colors. Through the windshield, I saw a dozen black sedans surround us, their spotlights blinding me, and behind them, I saw Mark, alive in handcuffs, screaming my name as they dragged him toward a van. My father leaned over, snatched the tablet from my lap, and whispered, "Sleep now. You're finally home." Then everything went black. The waking world was a muted, sterile haze of white noise and humming machinery. When I finally pried my eyelids open, I wasn't in a car, a jail cell, or even the hotel suite. I was in a small, windowless observation room overlooking a vast subterranean hangar. My head throbbed with the dull ache of a chemical sedative, and my throat felt as dry as desert sand. I sat up, the thin hospital gown fluttering against my skin. On the table in front of me sat a glass of water and a single handwritten note. My hands were no longer zip-tied, but a heavy magnetic bracelet locked around my wrist, glowing with a soft, pulsing red light. I picked up the note. It was in Mark's handwriting. "Look through the glass. Watch the end of the game." I walked to the reinforced window and looked down. Below, the hangar was a hive of activity. Dozens of people in tactical gear were dismantling a massive organized scheme, cataloging rows of crates labeled as medical supplies, the same crates I had unknowingly signed for in my logistics days, which were now being pried open to reveal not forbidden items, but sophisticated surveillance tech and classified dossiers. In the center of the floor stood my father, his hands raised in surrender, as agents from the Service of Internal Security moved in with heavy, non-lethal restrainers. He wasn't the mastermind I had feared. He was a disgraced operative who'd been trying to reclaim his stolen identity by selling out the very network that had discarded him years ago. Mark stood nearby, unchained and wearing a crisp suit, his expression unreadable as he watched his former partner in crime being hauled away. The door to my room hissed open. Mark stepped inside. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed by the weight of 1,000 secrets. But for the first time in our marriage, there was no performative mask. "Is it over?" I whispered, my voice barely holding together. "The immediate threat is," Mark replied, stepping toward me but stopping short, respecting the distance I instinctively put between us. "My involvement was a compromise. I was forced into this when they threatened you 3 years ago. I stayed in the game to protect you, to build enough evidence to bring the whole organized scheme down from the inside. The decoy, the woman you saw, she was a plant by your father to force you into a position where you'd have to take the fall for his crimes." I looked down at the red bracelet on my wrist. "And this?" "Temporary," he said. "It's a tracker, but not for them. It's for me. It's the only way the Internal Security Service would allow me to keep you close while they clear your name. Once the testimonies are finalized, that lock will deactivate. You'll be free, Sarah, truly free." "I don't know if I can go back to being us," I admitted, leaning my forehead against the cool glass. The betrayal felt like a scar that might never fully fade. The wedding, the honeymoon, the quiet nights reading on the couch, all of it felt like a ghost story told by someone I used to be. "I don't expect you to," Mark said quietly. "I'm resigning. I'm walking away from all of it. I've put enough distance between us and them that they won't be able to track us. But I understand if you want to leave. I've deposited everything, every cent they touched, into a blind trust. It's all yours. You can start over anywhere in the world." The next few weeks were a blur of depositions, legal hearings, and the slow, agonizing process of dismantling a life built on half-truths. My name was officially cleared. The Service of Internal Security wiped our records clean, treating our ordeal as a classified operation that had successfully neutralized a major threat. My father was sentenced to an enormous term, his legacy of manipulation finally coming to a dead end behind bars. On a Tuesday 6 months later, I stood on the deck of a ferry crossing a calm, cerulean sea. The air was crisp, tasting of salt and freedom. I looked down at my left hand. I had taken the wedding ring off the day I left the facility, but I hadn't thrown it away. It sat in my pocket, a reminder of a lesson learned at a high price. Trust is not a birthright, and love is not an excuse for secrets. I turned as a man approached the railing. It was Mark. He had kept his word, staying in the shadows, waiting for the signal that it was safe to surface. He didn't come close. He simply stood a few feet away, watching the horizon. "The boat arrives in 20 minutes, he said, not looking at me. "The rental house is ready. It's off the grid, exactly like you wanted." I didn't answer immediately. I watched the water, the way the light danced on the surface, indifferent to the chaos that had transpired below. I realized then that I wasn't waiting for him to tell me what to do next. I was simply enjoying the silence. I tucked the ring deeper into my pocket and turned toward him, a small, tentative smile touching my lips. "I'm not going back to the way things were, Mark," I said, my voice firm and clear. He nodded, a hint of genuine relief in his eyes. "I know. We start from zero, or we don't start at all." As the island appeared on the horizon, bathed in the soft, golden light of the morning, I took the first breath of air that didn't feel stolen. The honeymoon was over, and for the first time, my life was finally, truly mine. I walked toward the front of the deck, leaving the past in the wake of the boat, ready to write a story that actually belonged to me.